I've known this gentleman for many years. He's really kind of a pioneer in the internet here in New Mexico. Terry Boulanger is with us with New Mexico TechNet. He is CEO. Terry, good to see you.
Good to see you again too.
Thank you.
It's good to be here. It's as I was mentioning before, it's been a few years since we've gotten on the TV to talk about the internet in New Mexico, so it's good to be here.
Tell us what New Mexico TechNet does.
Well, New Mexico TechNet was the first internet service provider in the state. Back in 1985, the National Science Foundation, when it took over ARPANET, decided to drop the first hub for what was to become the internet at New Mexico TechNet. And then we fed the labs, the universities, the private sector and the schools and all those various organizations with internet service almost all the way through the mid-90s. And then as it became more commercialized and more of the telephone companies and big internet companies came along, then we stepped back out and the private sector came in and took over and started delivering more of it. So that's how we started it. And of course that was long before the World Wide Web, when you had to do everything with command lines and typing and green screens,
DOS and all that.
I remember those days.
Yeah, and so we did a lot of that, and of course we also did a lot of innovative stuff for the state. We built the first electronic income tax filing system for the state of New Mexico, the first automobile dealer registration system for the state. We provided access to court dockets and things like that for commercial use. So we did a lot of that before the World Wide Web started. Then as the web came along and it became easier to provide access to information, we stepped back from from that kind of stuff and began working on what we call today applications. And so since about 2000, we've been working mostly in trying to help deploy telemedicine programs and projects, the use of technology for delivering some type of medical support to rural areas, working with schools on the types of new programming and access to programming for education. So it's been a different challenge.
Yeah. And what's amazing is internet is it's such a household name now. It's it seems like everybody has internet. Right. However, there's so many people that still don't have access to internet. Do you help play a part in reaching to those rural areas?
Funny you should say that. That's really exactly one of the things we're working on right now. The state of New Mexico received, I think 3 years ago, received an ARRA grant. I don't know if you remember the ARRA program, the funding, to create a strategic plan, broadband strategic plan for the state of New Mexico. So they've been working on the technical side of it, and on the state's website, there's a website that's New Mexico Broadband. They have all the maps of where broadband is available and who are the service providers and what levels you can get and things like this. Headed up by a guy named George Clark, whose nickname is Gar, so we all know him as Gar. Okay. But he's been working very diligently, with various groups around the state on mapping broadband and trying to determine what it's going to take to expand broadband into some of the tougher to serve areas. So we have been asked to help him write a gap analysis on education and healthcare. So that's exactly what we've been doing. Now, as a result of that, we've been finding some really interesting things that are going on that most of us have no idea about, that are going to have some impact on the state. So it's really it's been an interesting challenge.
Now, where are we broadband challenged right now around the state? What's the most difficult area?
Well, the rural areas, especially the ranches and in the mountains. Those are the most difficult to serve. Yeah. The watchword today is fiber. Everybody wants fiber to connection to everything, right? Yeah. And of course that's expensive. It's an expensive proposition to lay fiber into rural areas. So a lot of what we're doing, a lot of what's happening is that the broadband providers are providing wireless services into mountain areas and things like this, which are oftentimes adequate, but they're impacted by the weather. They're impacted by climatic conditions and things like that. So at times, it is somewhat problematic. But when you start looking at education and telemedicine, these are two areas that you can't have iffy service, especially telemedicine. And, so, if you've got a stroke patient who is sitting way out in the boonies, and they've gotten him to some rural clinic, that has normal connection, and that rural clinic is counting on a specialist in Albuquerque to determine whether or not they can help this stroke patient. You can't have the wind knocking the connection down,
Right.
So it's those kinds of things are a challenge. One of the more interesting things that's happening is happening in education, and the U.S. Department of Education has created a new Common Core standard for education. The interesting thing is, when I started this, about a year ago, started this study, we started getting into this Common Core standard issue, and virtually nobody knew about it except for a few educators. Now, of course, we're starting to see some articles in the newspapers and on the news. Essentially, what the Common Core standard is it's a shift away from just learning subject matter, and teaching the students how then to utilize that subject matter in critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. Now, as a layperson on the outside, and a business person, I'm going, yay! Finally, this makes sense, right? But getting there to where it works is the tough part,
Right.
And so part of this is going to be what's known as PARC assessment, and PARC stands for Partnership Assessment for Careers and College, something like that. Well, this PARC assessment essentially is going to consolidate all the assessments that the kids are currently doing in the schools into two-week windows. One about, I think it's 60% of the year, and the other at the end of the year, to determine how the kids are learning and what's going on, with their learning process. Well, the interesting part is it's real time, online, all at the same time, nationwide.
Oh, that's amazing.
So in New Mexico, we're talking 300,000 kids, all online at the same time during the same week, trying to take this real time assessment that funnels into what the rest of the kids around the rest of the country are doing, and all loaded onto our internet backbone at the same time.
Yeah.
How's that going to function?
And the internet is just like a freeway. If it gets congested, it slows down.
Right. Yeah. So that's part of the assessment. Part of what we're working on is trying to determine,
a way around that.
Yeah. Well, what's going to happen? We just, we don't know. We know we've got adequate bandwidth to get in and out of the state. We know that pipes are big enough right now to get in and out of the state, but we don't know what's going to happen once you get off the north, south, east, west backbones. What's going to happen when as you take one of those side roads up towards the Jemez, or out to House, New Mexico, or Roy? What's going to happen, when you start hitting these side roads? So it's going to be an interesting challenge to see what happens with this program.
Now, go back again. When you started in '85, what did you have that kind of turned into the internet? It was a link between the labs and UNM and things like that. What did it look like?
The NSFNET had its big hub in Boulder, Colorado, because that's, of course, this was where the ARPANET, which was a military, which was the defense network, had hubbed. And so what they essentially did was they provided a 56 kilobit connection from Boulder to Albuquerque to our site. Now, we here had what are called T1s, 45 megabit connections between our hub and UNM, Tech, State, Sandia, Los Alamos, the Air Force Research Labs, and I don't know if I said the state of New Mexico, but connected to the state of New Mexico as well. So that was the initial hub. That's what NSF provided for connectivity. So we quickly burned up that 56 kilobits.
I'm sure
with these customers. So we expanded that and put in more bandwidth up there, which we paid for ourselves because. Our clients.
What did messages look like in those days? What did it?
It looked well. It was all. There were text. It was all text. It was like your text message on your phone today.
Yeah.
That was the heavy duty. Traffic, and of course, data files could still be sent, but they were 10 times the size they are today. And so when we had organizations like the Large Array Telescope down at Socorro. Well, those researchers down there had to send their files, the data coming from those radio telescopes. They had to send those to Washington, into the computers
Yeah.
in Washington for crunching.